So this is a video response for Professor Anton, but it is not a part of my previous dialogues with you, so I'm going to play this clip in order to bring the audience up to speed.
Okay, so I wanted to see if I can't follow this out a little bit. Now, this was partly motivated from looking at some comments, watching some videos. It was partly motivated from the Amazing Atheist recent video called Atheism in 60 Seconds, which it was interesting, but it was also, I think, so brief. And it's part of blog culture and, tweet culture where everything gets down to this little tiny point. But I guess I wonder if some of the robust dialogue and the debate potential isn't being lost on YouTube. And I'm going to say one thing first, and then I want to give this sort of overarching framework. Okay, the first thing is I would love to see some people, and if you're watching this video, you know who you are. Find the person who you've been doing lots of dialogues with and ask yourself a couple of questions. Okay, if you've been in some debates and you've been in some really serious disagreements with people, and there are major YouTubers out there who I think you know who you are. You're in major debates and dialogues with people. Try, just for the sake of your audience, for the sake of the future of YouTube, for the integrity of yourself, for the community, try to say as clearly and as, I guess, as honestly as you can what you think the other person's position is. Don't lampoon them. Don't be snarky. Don't throw onto them the position that you know they probably don't have, or maybe have a resemblance to, but one that you have a quick and ready-made critique for. But try to imagine that the person is in the room and say their position as clearly as you think they could. I mean, actually try to defend it with no lampooning, no snarkiness. Try to actually state what you think their position is. And then, once each of you try to state what the other person's position is. And honestly, like you're really trying to be that person, to really try to convincingly give the position better than they could. I mean, see if you can understand it to such a degree that you could make it better than they're making it. Okay, so you try to give that. And then, once you've done that, then you begin the critique. There's just not enough of that going on.
Now, anyone who's read Plato would know that really most Socratic dialogues don't really end in any sort of clear-cut resolution. It's, Socrates usually comes off as the most clever, but it's not like, everyone is brought to Socrates' point of view. And I think that the brilliance of Plato's writing is his ability to argue the various sides well of different points of view, as you say, argue them as well or better than they could. And to me, that's the brilliance of Plato as a writer. On the other hand, the reality of acting like the character Socrates, I'm a bit more skeptical of, personally. I feel that, with the Euthyphro, thinking of this because of YouTube debates, people like William Lane Craig, who is no stranger to Euthyphro, the dialogue ends with Socrates basically going, look, I got better things to do, look at the time, I gotta go, after going around and around and around with Euthyphro on the argument. And at a certain point, when dealing with, let's take William Lane Craig in particular, there's a point where I can't take him as arguing in good faith, and therefore it disinclines me to take his mouthpieces as arguing in good faith either. So, let me see if I can get this all into frame here. There's a little whiteboard sort of help diagram this. So here's me, making video responses to YouTube apologists. These are the people I've made video responses to in the past. Most of these people were essentially regurgitating the arguments of a handful of Christian philosophers, primarily William Lane Craig, Moreland, Plantinga, and behind them stands the Christian media industry, which, in my opinion, its essential job is to scare the believers, scare the flock into believing that anyone with a contrary religion or point of view is in some way degenerate and poses a moral or, some sort of threat to society and will lead the flock to damnation. And they need people like William Lane Craig to essentially be their champion and make it appear as if he is slaying the other top champions of proponents of these other ideas, at least from their point of view. He doesn't actually have to win the debate. He can, you know, keep playing with the same sort of sophistry and tactics and rhetoric that he normally does, as long as, you know, the believers keep on believing that he, you know, he stood up to Hitchens and Dawkins, then all is well. But I saw a video recently and I stupidly did not save it, and then I spent too much time this morning trying to re-find the video, in which William Lane Craig dismisses all of YouTube atheism as unphilosophical and that it's all emotive and anger, and no one making videos on YouTube knows anything about philosophy. That, of course, is false. I can think of at least a half-dozen people, myself included, who have a background in philosophy, and more who at least have a basic college education. And having an actual education in philosophy, I can say with a fair deal of authority that the arguments as presented by William Lane Craig really do not rise above essentially a sophomore level. And a lot of the core of what his apologetics and Christian philosophy is based on is, you know, a lot of Aristotelianism, Cartesianism, points of view which Western philosophy long ago moved past, and he is an incredibly marginalized figure within the discipline of philosophy, but he is a superstar within the realm of the Christian you know, noise machine. Let's blare trumpets to declare that we are unafraid of our pagan enemies, and that we will, you know, we will conquer these heathens with William Lane Craig, our intellectual champion. And it's all so much disingenuous nonsense. And so if you can't take the source seriously, it's harder to take the mouthpieces seriously, I guess. And there really is no resolution to debating with somebody like William Lane Craig. He very carefully selects what he even acknowledges is an atheist argument or is a version of atheism. So many, you know, semantic games and intellectual game playing goes on. I mean, debating him would be almost like, you know, an intellectual chess match between two people, and that's why people enjoy it. People, you know, some people love chess and they want to, you know, follow who's the world champion, who's, you know, grandmaster, can a human beat a computer. And so people love that kind of the intellectual face-off between people. But I think in reality, I would rather debate William Lane Craig in the Colosseum with a sword than have to, you know, attempt to live on stage dismantle his drivel and just constantly rebuff his game. In a nutshell, basically, I think that their ideology incentivizes them, you know, Christian apologists, their ideology incentivizes them to deliberately misconstrue their opponent's point of view, to solidify their own flock, and to intellectually bolster the already true believers. And I don't really know how much debating most of these topics is really worth it in this medium. I don't know if this is if this medium can rise above the very, very superficial arguments that the people with some vested interest in creating controversy to rally support to their cause and intentionally misconstruing their opponent's point of view to score points with the already like-minded people. That is the game that usually happens in most public dialogue, whether it be in mainstream media or in much of the press or in YouTube videos, and I think it's part to do with the nature of the medium itself. It's sort of sad that the most fervent defenders of certain points of view seem to be honestly little more than trolls. I really don't think it would be possible to sway William Lane Craig in his point of view, not because he has this undefeatable philosophy. I find his point of view not even relevant, but there is I don't want to say a danger, but an almost hazard, I guess you would put it, for engaging in these people at all. When you meet a proselytizer on the street screaming about Jesus, it's pretty clear that they relish confrontation. They relish the opportunity to try and ask gotcha questions and to try and outsmart you and to constantly draw you in and interrogate you and answer question after question and play who is smarter. At the same time, with religion in particular, they don't ultimately claim that it is an intellectually based thing. It's something that they believe in a rather emotive level. And I think one of the problems that evangelicals and apologists for religion in general have with atheists is essentially they don't get to play the who's better, Batman or Superman, my God or your God, Jesus Christ or the Buddha. They don't get to play that game with atheists. They don't get to whip out their comic books and show how Jesus saved the world in this version. I mean, there's a level at which it's like I refuse to debate a Christian on the arguments of a pagan or on modified pagan and Islamic arguments. If you have nothing better than Aristotle, I'm not going to offer you anything more. I'm not going to offer any better counter-argument than Kant or Hume. Those people have, in all likelihood, more intelligent than I am, and if you don't believe them, then I'm probably not going to convince you anyway. With street preachers, being disagreed with tends to only bolster their own conviction, and you could spend all day debunking William Lane Craig's narrative of reality. And in the narrative of William Lane Craig, there are no intellectually literate, philosophically literate YouTube atheists. That's false. In the world of William Lane Craig, the secular universities have all been taken over by teachers who preach atheism, and in my experience, that's patently false. As I've said in previous videos, most of my college professors went out of their way to not give their own point of view and to be even-handed and be what's the word, professional. That's not to say that none of them had a point of view, but ironically most of them who I could discern their point of view most acutely were conservative rather than liberal, and none of my teachers, taught to, were preaching to their students to go out and proselytize relativism or any of this other horseshit that William Lane Craig is accusing secular universities of. He lives in his own version of reality where there's only the definition of terms that he wants to debate by, and things are the way they are because the country's been corrupted and hijacked by liberals. Honestly, without the possibility of good faith debate, I don't really think it's worth it. And I guess if, with all the controversy about atheism in the media and the way things are spun by William Lane Craig or Bill O'Reilly or whoever, and billboards and lawsuits, I guess if I was put in charge of all of it, I would probably be much more vicious. I would probably, make a billboard with listing the net worth of the biggest televangelists and superstars of Christianity on a billboard, and with a subcaption, "Who do you pray to?" Because it is a kind of industry, and they have their own media, vanity presses. They have radio stations coast to coast, television stations coast to coast, constantly broadcasting their message. And again, it just with YouTube, it would seem to open the opportunity. Now we can reach worldwide and sort of counter that omnipotent presence of Christian media. But I also feel that it just gives, in a way, it kind of gives them more ammunition when they would probably fade faster into cultural irrelevance if simply left alone, and their marginality was more recognized. But at the same time, on a political level, at least perhaps up until relatively recently, the religious right was a serious political threat, depending on what your point of view and your values are. And so I guess how much these issues are worth continuing to talk over depends on what exactly is your starting point to this subject. This, is there a God? I find the question not even worth debating over. For starters, the word God itself could be taken in 20 different ways by 20 different people. What are we even talking about? What exactly is this debate? If you're a Christian, I refuse to debate what are basically Aristotelian arguments, because he was a pagan. All right, come up with some Christian arguments for your God, and don't recite Aristotle. I don't want to hear about Kalam. That's not a Christian argument. I don't want to argue against something generic. There's quite a number of things we can specifically say about the Bible. It's not the oldest book in the world. There are prior books from neighboring civilizations which the Bible seems clearly influenced by. Jesus seems clearly to be a product of his own time and place. John the Baptist still has followers who believe that he was the true Messiah to this day. For much of the Bible, we have either no evidence for it or as much evidence as we have for the Iliad, and yet there are millions of people who believe that it is the literally true inherent word of God. But approaching that subject is more about approaching the Bible as a piece of media versus the Bible as this mystified through the process of history text. We can intelligently compare it to other religions, to other philosophies, and I guess in my opinion, to borrow from Nietzsche to summarize what I would think of the Bible, is that it's human all too human. This is, in spite of its pretensions of being divinely inspired, this is pretty much on par with what we would expect from the human imagination, and that there's nothing miraculous to it. And but that's not the sort of discussion that ever comes up when you're arguing over the existence of God. What the hell that even supposed to mean? But those sorts of debates are avoided. I mean, this is a book by one of Dr. Craig's former students, which deals with his arguments directly and that sort of thing. But it all sort of, is selectively ignored or zeroed in on in terms of the game that other people want to play, how they want to spin it. And being in a constant game of spinning, unspinning what other people have spun is just an obnoxiously tedious process that, in my opinion, doesn't accomplish as much as people would imagine it should. It's not productive. It doesn't really enlighten humanity, and it just draws people into arguing with the sort of people that get off on being argued with to begin with. And I don't know. I guess that everyone should sort of take these sorts of things into consideration, even if I'm specifically talking about, Christian apologetics and religious proselytizers on the internet. But I suppose with any sort of discussion, you could extend the question of, is my opponent arguing in good faith? Are they regurgitating something else? What's the agenda of the the person that they're regurgitating? You know, what is this socioeconomic? I mean, there's all these sorts of questions that we should ask ourselves before even bothering to debate, I guess. So I'm just going to end this completely long and rambling video here, and if I think of anything else to add, I'll just make a follow-up. Have a nice day or something. I never know how to end a video.